Hi, Sarah.
Hey, Paul.
How's it going?
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for doing this. As I mentioned to you, I'm excited to talk about process in general, especially as that applies to your music career, but also connecting that to yoga, which I know you're way into or have been in your past, but also just how these processes have affected your life, how thinking about systems has worked for you. But before any of that, I have some really hard hitting questions that I want to get into. And those are these three. First question: Skittles or Starbursts?
Ooh, hard neither.
Whoa, okay. I mean,
Not into them.
I've not had either of those in a long time, but even when you're like a kid, you didn't have a preference?
Oh, okay. When I was a kid, Skittles.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
we can't just be eating Skittles now, but just like historically.
I think some people can.
Yeah, just not.
I have a very classy friend who loves fruity candies. I'm just like, chocolate? And she prefers Skittles. So
I
there you go.
so yeah, she would have a
Fun
snap.
fact, she's a dentist, and I hope she
Oh,
never watches this.
right. It is
Be
interesting
like,
when
and the
when you talk about when you talk to medical people, they often have like all of these weird vices that make no sense. Like my uncle is a cardiologist, but
no.
he's just like, the deal is it's all genes. Like you can't do shit, and you're like, oh, that's depressing.
Right.
uh,
Somebody just mentioned in the chat, by the way, that they have Skittles next to them right now. So
oh, well, it's a fitting
there
situation, fitting question that I've just asked of you. Okay, next question: Arizona or Florida?
I have to say Florida, and I feel like that's unfortunate that I don't know Arizona better. I've just because I live in New York and I lived
Mm-hmm.
in Montreal before, so it's and I have friends in Miami. It's just like a really easy place to go and whatever. But I kind of dream of the landscapes in places like Arizona. It's more of a place of my dreams
Oh, okay. So it's
than a reality.
Florida from a practical standpoint because you know it. Arizona in a more theoretical standpoint. Okay.
Yeah,
Seinfeld or Friends?
Seinfeld.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Especially as we age, right? Seinfeld just makes more sense all the time.
yeah,
Right. Okay.
funnier,
It's funnier.
funnier
Yes.
than Friends.
Yes. All right. Well, now that we've gotten the good stuff out of the way, I want to back up slightly and tell people what I know about your life, and then you can correct me as I go. Okay.
Okay.
So Sarah is most famously a member, which is kind of negotiable. She's been kind of in and out, touring sometimes, but also foundational with the Arcade Fire. She is in a band of kind of her own making called Belle Orchestre, which I say wrong because it's a French word. And she does solo work as a violinist. We met a long time ago because of some Arcade Fire connections. And I have gotten to know her music making career, but also, as I mentioned up front, the fact that she's pretty big into yoga. And I thought that there might be a bit of carryover between not only the music side and the yoga side, but also how this has just affected your life. How did I do on that introduction?
Good. Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
totally. I lived in Montreal for over 20 years and came up with like good friends of mine and I started Bellercast and around the same time Arcade Fire was getting going and we shared some members and I hopped in and became a part of the family as it were and Arcade Fire is sort of this like massive group of people that has we've mostly just kind of been the same crew on stage for the last it's a long time now.
Yeah. Yeah, we're
And
aging.
the same with
Everyone
Bellercast.
says.
It's kind of it's a bit of a smaller number of people, but it's the same. I mean, it's nostalgic for me to talk about that community in Montreal now because I live in New York and I don't have a crew of people that I've been playing music with for over 20 years or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
But it's quite a special. There's other groups, you know, that have come up at around the same time. It's very close knit. It's a
Mm-hmm.
small, kind of a small town in a way. Like when you get the English speaking artist community. Anyways, it's funny. I joke about it because now I'm like this like fish out of water in New York. Like, where's
Hmm.
the coziness?
Right.
Yeah.
That makes me wonder, what was it that was attractive about music in the first place? Was it something that you could do on your own, or was it more of a collaborative thing, even way back when you first started?
Yeah, it's hard to remember stuff from when we're that little because I
Hmm.
started playing the violin when I was super tiny. And
Hmm.
my motivation was more that my big brother was doing it. I
Hmm.
was two, and I was like, give it to me now. But
Hmm.
I really wanted it. Like, I don't even know why, because why does a 2-year-old do anything? Why does
Hmm.
a 3-year-old do anything? But I was super, super into it. And I just kind of kept plowing along, but I was always very particular about it. I didn't want to do what I was supposed to do, obviously. And, I quit at a fairly early age and explored other things like rock and roll guitar. And, I learned a bunch of other stuff. And I kind of made my way back to it and decided I would study it. And my motivation for kind of that at the time was, well, I love improvising and composing and making music with other people. And I'm just way more fluent on this instrument because my body grew around it. So
Hmm.
I kind of went back to violin and like carried it into my university study. Like I studied jazz and I think it was a couple of things. It was playing with other people and it was using my creative brain, which is a subtle thing, when you're growing up. I didn't consider myself a composer, but I had always been an improviser, and that led me to composition and led me to, you know, also collective composition, which is a thing that the Bell Orchestra does together. And yeah, it's both. It's people and it's also brain.
Yeah. I've been way in on this book called Range recently, which is about how generalists do well in a world that seems to celebrate specialists. And one thing you mentioned is that idea that you started with violin and then started to explore other things, and that you came back to this thing that allowed you access to something. So what was, what do you think you were accessing in those moments of creativity? What did it feel like?
I remember I used to do this thing when I was a kid, like my whole life. I think other people enjoyed it, but I remember it like I was this forceful little kid and I was like, okay, now everyone sit down and tell me a feeling. And, and then I would play that feeling. And
Oh.
I remember, and it would go on. Like it was me as like this like mini little experimental improviser
Hmm.
at all ages. And I would just like lock into this thing that felt so free and just felt like my freest form of expression and communication, and I loved to do that. And I that's pretty much like what I've created my life around, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. So
I'm
it's,
like still doing that, a little bit anyway.
and I wonder, this is getting further ahead because I want to fill in a couple of gaps. But have there been times in your life, especially as Arcade Fire got bigger and your life got more complicated, where you felt like you lost sight of that, or has that always been there?
I definitely lose it from time to time.
Hmm.
Um, because often, like, actually I just found it again after a long time of not accessing it because I yeah, for the past maybe 6 or 9 months, I haven't been around, I haven't been traveling as much and I haven't been around the people that I generally create music with. And I mean, I write solo music and that does come from an improvisational place,
Hmm.
but I can't always do that. Like, as you know, I mean, that's a very, like, I feel like solo composition relates to the world of writing and like it's very solitary and it's very interior.
Hmm.
And so I didn't feel like doing that for the last long while, and I wasn't exactly around a ton of people or anyone really that I was kind of playing with. And so I got together with two of my oldest, dearest friends last week, and we made kind of an improvised album, just like, let's do this. Like, we just completely out of the blue did it. And like, there it was,
Mm-hmm.
and for me, I think it's, I need a little bit of consistency with other humans that I have that language with.
Mm-hmm.
Because then when you're not doing that, you really, yeah, it's like a tap that can kind of shut off, and you wonder why you don't feel so good. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think what can be a little bit depressing about it, as I think back to my basketball past, the thing that you're saying about improvising within a group is very true of specifically basketball, actually, because there aren't as many rules. It's kind of a free flowing experience. And
Mhm.
in reality, the moments of true zen, where you're completely hooked up with the people you're playing around, and you've also lost that critique brain for whatever reason, you finally let go of that. They're so fleeting and so seemingly minuscule that you often wonder, like, why am I spending so much time trying to set up these brief moments? But at the same time, those brief moments are what makes life worth living, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what is tricky, is that it does take a lot of effort to set up the constraints so that we can just find those brief, like, senses of like, oh, everything's okay, right? Does that
Yeah,
jive with you?
totally. Yeah.
What are the, so in thinking about, I'm really, as you know, and some people might know, I got to write about music for a year and a half of my life, and it was fascinating to learn all of the ins and outs that go into putting on a show, right? So like, those of us in the world just think that the band kind of just like walks out onto the stage and goes. Could you take me through a normal day of a tour day? Like, what are the actual mechanics of that?
It extremely depends on what group or non-group we're referring to,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of an interesting thing, like, to me anyway, because I have such different experiences. Like, so a solo tour, I I have to practice like an incredible amount, because the music, it, well, first of all, it's kind of all me, even if I'm playing with a drummer or whatever, but it's very intense and it's very violinistic, and it's like, if I'm not completely on my game, it's way more athleticism than any other music I play. Like, if I'm not on the game, I can train wreck my own show pretty easily, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a nightmare. And it has happened once or twice, and
Mm-hmm.
hated those moments. And then, and then if you like go to the other extreme, a band like Arcade Fire, which is like, has a whole company of people around it, we'll spend time rehearsing as well, like before a tour, maybe a couple of weeks or a few weeks. And some of that is getting the music back in our bones, or in our bones for the first time if it's newer stuff. And then there's the technical rehearsals, but we have like so many, we have teams of people that are, the audio people, like everyone's rehearsing because it's like a massive production. But
Mm-hmm.
then, on tour, we don't have to like woodshed, like our instruments is hard, like, or not really, because it's rock music. And yes, people are doing like vocal warm-ups and playing here and there, but it's not the same thing. And then another kind of thing is another band that doesn't have a huge company of people around it, so you spend way more time, like, you're going to rehearse a little bit more, maybe because it's like Bellercast is, it's a little bit more like musically chaotic or intense or whatever. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like, there's strings and horns and like the tuning and all that kind of stuff. But then also we're our own team, so we spend like the entire day just like hauling gear and setting it up and sound like
Mm-hmm.
so it completely depends on the outfit, you know.
Sure. What have you come up with um a strategy for how you just get yourself into the mindset to be ready to perform? I ask that because I'm
Yeah.
really interested in, again, going back to sports past, but also even public speaking, and sometimes even with just like sitting down to work, there's kind of a routine that I've had to develop just to put myself in that mindset. Do
Yeah.
you have a consistent one, or does it vary? How does that work for you?
It's the same thing. It's project to project. So like a solo show, I get much more nervous. It's much harder work for me mentally and physically. So I'll practice during the day, but not too close to the show. Like I have to have eaten and not be too full. And, I have to be hydrated, but not like all of those things
Hmm.
that
Right.
being an athlete. And then there's getting into the zone. And so the solo thing is really where I use some of the more like yoga specific tools. So I'll do like the calming alternate nostril breathing. It's like in one and out. Like that really works right before I go on stage because otherwise I'm panicking for no reason. It's all fine, but
Hmm.
oh my God, it's a solo show and it's like the world is on your shoulders. And so I do breath work and I do way more systematic stuff. And then when I'm playing with bands, like the energy of going on stage with people completely tricks you into not being nervous. Like,
Mm.
because you just, it's so I like to be around people. I like to be around the people that I'm about to play with. And if I'm not, it's a little weird. Like sometimes with Arcade Fire, like I'll take way longer getting ready because we have like outfits and I do all this like elaborate makeup. And if I take too long, I'm like, oh no. like, and then I don't catch the vibe. And so I have
Hmm.
to be finished long enough to hang out and you get the team energy
Right.
going.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's do you feel like because you get more nervous for a solo show, does it then feel more satisfying if it goes well?
It's incredibly satisfying, yeah, on a different level. Like the euphoria of like pulling it off and being really in your zone and letting go of your critical. If you can let go of the critical mind for a second when you're doing a solo show, you've won. Like you're
Hmm.
on cloud nine, and connecting with the audience is so much more of a bigger deal because it's not, I'm not playing to an arena or like a festival of 100,000 people where everybody's like a tiny dot. It's you know my bigger shows are still in the hundreds, and so it's intense. Like you can see people's feelings.
Right.
You
Hmm.
can see the whites of their eyes. So it's much more visceral on that intimacy level. And then like something like Arcade Fire, or like bigger shows, it's intense and a visceral feeling, but on a macro level, like on a like you're on a mountaintop screaming at the wind, like it's epic. It's
Hmm.
everything's in a more epic proportion, but it's less about you and your doings than just like being in this big thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's funny when you talk about like that, the power of being on a team, right? I think it's very translatable, of course, to sports, but it's also translatable, I think, to even working in an office, right? Because I think one thing that has changed in the last year or so is that there's an energy you can hook into when you are with a group of people, even if that group of people is just like, we work at State Farm Insurance and our day is just like helping people build their policies or whatever. And one thing I've noticed is that in this last year, a lot of people have been awakened to the fact that self-generating that sense of belonging or just the ability to sit down and work is really challenging. um, how have you managed that in your own life when it just comes to like running the administration of being you? Because I don't even necessarily mean the fun stuff of composing, but there's just, website stuff and all of that. Have you
Mhm.
have you come up with ways to sort of take that same ability to prepare for a solo show for I have to now just like do work on my own?
Yeah, I feel like that's a sort of an art that I never hone well. And also because I also like run or I co-own these yoga studios, which this year, like let's not even get into that. It's been insane.
Hmm.
But like I feel like over half of my life is spent where I'm like I am an actor on TV playing a really bad secretary for my own
Hmm.
for my own businesses, because I feel like I'm so bad at admin that I feel like I'm pretending to do it,
Hmm.
and 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 it takes me so much longer, and so and I'm generally not that clear on my systems, and I'm
Yeah.
much more clear on my systems when it comes to like I know that if I have to get in shape on my instrument, I know exactly what I need to do. It's I know how to get in shape. I know how to train my body. It's the same. Those things are really obvious to me, but like,
Hmm.
you know, getting things done on an admin level is like an emergency all the time.
Right. So do you
Everything's always 3 weeks late and super bad.
do
Like
you have you come up with strategies for how to like outsource that stuff?
as much as possible,
Hmm.
but but no, like
Right. That is the trick. Because I think it is, I mean, it is it's so important as we age to figure out like what are our strengths,
right.
what are things that we are good at but we're avoiding, and what are things that we're just bad at and so we should pass off to someone else.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like I've always fought with the question of how much is my time worth, right? So like, the things that I'm good at are worth this, and if I have to pay someone else to do that, that's fine because my time is worth more. But that also somehow feels um arrogant also.
Yeah, and it's just such a slippery slope.
Right, right.
I'm
Yeah.
not great at doing the dishes either, but like I do them.
Right. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean I think that's the trick, is figuring out like which of these things am I truly would be better placed to have somebody else do it, or is it just like I don't want to do it because it's boring, right?
Yeah.
I do think it's
I feel like I'm gonna have that figured out more in my 60s than my 40s. Like I'm just entered my 40s a couple years ago, and I'm still like kind of a disorganized kid.
yeah, yeah,
It'll
that's
pass.
right. Well, I think, I mean, I guess one thing that is potentially heartening about that is that you are, by all measures, a successful person. And yet you still haven't got it all figured out. So I think, one thing we see, or I see a lot with people um, who are hoping to participate in creative processes or just get better at being a freelancer or working for other people in general, is that they're just so hard on themselves about like the quantity of work that's getting done. I would imagine that in the last year there's been for you a lot of like having to do some self-talk about like this is okay that I'm not getting a ton done. As people who are watching or listening may not know, you are very pregnant right now, and that has happened in a pandemic. Have you felt like that has exacerbated, I don't know, being self-critical, or have you given yourself a break? How has that experience been?
I've given myself a break because not only that, but and I have a lot of appointments all the time because I'm 41 and like they're like, oh,
Right.
geriatric. You're like, okay, I go to the hospital all the time and I'm not sick. Everything's
Hmm.
totally fine. So there's just a lot of like time spent in appointments that I don't have for other pursuits. And running a like my yoga studios went online like last March, and we're not an online savvy company. We were brick and mortar. We were really good at the thing we did, and so we've been like fighting this uphill battle, doing things that we're not necessarily suited for. And so that's been this whole other thing. And it's not like I am doing that alone. Like I definitely don't run this like digital space, but I have a hand in it. And so there's a ton of time spent like doing that too. And I haven't been super hard on myself about like, I didn't also write another solo record also because as well, like I'm putting out another record. I just like I wrote a lot in the past couple of years, and that's coming to fruition now. Everything, there was like a coronavirus year delay. So everything that would have already come out, let's say last winter or spring, is now coming out. So it's
Hmm.
just like this giant pause button for a lot of people in the, arts and entertainment and in lots of industries, of course, like
Hmm.
everything. But yeah, no, I mean, I've definitely like I've felt the toll of not being in a creative space just kind of existentially, but I'm not like, you should have also been in a super creative space every day.
Hmm.
Like, of course not,
Yeah. Do
you
you,
know.
I mean, have you been around people who are not so good at giving themselves a break in this last year? I mean, just like talking to them, because it seems like I've seen a lot of people who are really, really struggling with that.
it's funny. I know a lot of people that have been in a super creative space, and it's more like the Canadians that are just like they're like, in this zone of playing music all the time and
Mm-hmm.
not like living in the heart, like in New York and running other kinds of businesses. Like a lot of the musicians I know, I think have been having a pretty prolific
Yeah.
time.
It's funny you mentioned Canada because I of course live in LA, and one thing that has happened in LA is that people are like, "Oh my god, I have to stay home. This is very different." If you live in a climate that is cold where you're used to some large portion of the year, you're going to have to stay your ass at home. You have
Yeah,
built up kind of a coping mechanism already.
totally.
People in Los Angeles do not have that coping mechanism because they're like, "What?
Right.
I should be able to go outside and it's 70 degrees every day." And I think that it has been having grown up in a place that was cold and having spent lots of time in other places that's cold. I am kind of used to like the hunker down mentality. And I think
Yeah.
I hadn't really thought of that until now, but in LA, it has been different because a lot of people who are used to the nice weather aren't used to that sort of.
Like they've never heard the term hunker down in LA. Like I don't think
Yeah.
that doesn't exist.
They really make fun of me here because I'm always like anytime it gets a little bit cold, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so happy because now I don't feel guilty about just sitting inside writing or whatever. But
Yeah.
when it's nice out, my brain is always saying like go outside because this might not last.
Right.
So it's harder to stay in that mode. Okay, we got a question from somebody who is not going to appear on screen, but her name's Renee, and she wonders, I feel like there are some similarities between improvising and a first draft. How important is it to you after you initially improvise to go back and work with or tweak what you initially came up with?
Yeah, that's a good question. It depends on if it's like improvised music and it's in that sense doesn't get necessarily worked on. Like if it's happening in real time, let's say it's, in that milieu of like free jazz or improvised music, experimental stuff, and it's all about what's happening there. But
Mm-hmm.
actually, since I do write from improvising, and so does my like one of my bands, Bell Orchestre, it writes from that. We spend an amazing amount of time tinkering with the thing that came out of a raw listening feeling place, which
Mm-hmm.
is it's such a circuitous way to get to a finished point, but it's so you come up with really interesting stuff. And I imagine with a draft, like I'm not a writer, but I mean, because it's you and the page, you can work it down to the bone, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
at a certain point with improvised music, even if you're crafting and sculpting and building upon it, you're trying to preserve the original energy of stuff. Really sounds different when you don't know what you're doing. And I don't know if that's a parallel with writing, like,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but with music that it's just kind of falling out of you because you're hearing and you're being receptive and it's raw and it sounds maybe like halting and tentative. Like that's really beautiful and people really relate to it. If you play that thing again 10,000 times, it gets more and more confident and poised and it loses this character. So it's like
Mm.
it's half as much about tweaking and shaping and carving as much as it is preserving that like shaky soul,
Mm-hmm.
that it started from. If that
Yeah,
answers your question,
that does it
Renee.
resonates with me too, just because I find that with a book, especially like you said, you could work it down to well, this guy went to look for a whale and he didn't find it, right? Like you could at a certain point you're just like, why am I even telling this big full story when I could just summarize this for you? As you work on something, you just like you can start to edit it down too much, and it does lose that sense of playfulness and the fragility that I think is important, and the thing that also makes it unique to you, right? So like you could compose something and then run it through artificial intelligence and have like what would be the perfect piece of music, but then it wouldn't be personal anymore, and somehow
Yeah.
the audience like all knows that instinctively.
Yeah, it would sound like an algorithm.
Right, right. When it comes to like, I'm interested in this idea of creating something that's improvisational, working on it so that it can be recorded, but then having to perform it again such that it seems improvisational. Yet I'm guessing that there's a fair bit of improvisation that happens in that performance as well, or is that wrong?
Well, I can actually use the example of the Bellarcast album that's coming out in like a matter of a month or something.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we've never done this before. All of our stuff came from improvisation, and then we would work it and re kind of relearn it and all that. And that's actually that's another thing that's it's pretty hard. And but we would record it as it's in a learned way. What we did this time, we always wanted to actually record us improvising
Mm.
and have the album actually come from that, not something polished. So we we recorded several improvised sessions like over a week or two in different points of time at a house that I used to have in the countryside, and we kind of wired the whole house, and it was really fascinating to experience because every room was mic'd and we were all in different rooms, so we had separation, but we some of us were together and we had we had video and audio, of course. And so the bedrock of that album is completely improvised. But
Mm.
then we worked on it, but on top of that, we didn't ever remove the original like fragile layers.
Mm-hmm.
We we fortified them, we arranged around and on top of them. But okay, so then so then when we've performed it, it's not out yet, but we did a little run of shows in Europe in the summer of 2019. And the thing with that album is we have an arrangement for orchestra. And so, oh my goodness, having to learn something that was originally improvised to the exact minutia, because now you've got a 60 plus person symphony
Mm-hmm.
beside you on stage playing like sheet music, and you're so we like that is a hilarious exercise, and we managed to do that, and those shows were like quite beautiful and really really satisfying. And then we would also play these club shows on the other nights that didn't have an orchestra, and we could get a lot freer with the material, but it was still like not complete. There weren't ever any moments where it was like completely improvised. It would be a little looser, but
Mm-hmm.
it's really funny taking something that's that loose and then making it like a porcelain
Mm-hmm.
replica of something super loose.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we'll continue to do that with that project because it does work so well with symphony. But I mean, you should see everybody's like own particular notes, because a lot of us like aren't necessarily working with sheet music, and it's just like weird like caveman drawings and
Mm-hmm.
you know
Right, right. Yeah. It's just like
this is
this
what
is
I
a
do
language
every
that this is a language that only you speak.
yeah.
Um, one we have a question from James who wonders something that I think actually connects well with this. Is there anything that signals to you that once you've tinkered for a certain amount of time, you've got it right and you're ready to move on to the next thing? Like, is there? I'm sure that a lot of that's intuition, but is there
Yeah.
some?
Well, again, it's a lot easier when you're working with other people to let go of your own neuroses around your own playing and your own
Mm,
process.
mm-hmm.
So, like, my solo work is so much more like it's so meticulous because it's just me and I tinker forever. And I
Mm-hmm.
also am making this really elaborate, very pattern based, rich, lots of like technical, it's this whole thing. Whereas like this experience I had last week with um you know a dear friend of mine on upright bass and a dear friend on cello, it's like you can just let go of your own
Mm-hmm.
because you've got other people and you see them kind of picking at the thing they did, and you go no 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 no, like let it be, it's beautiful, let it breathe. And so you start doing that more, and it's really interesting. But I
Mm-hmm.
find it incredibly challenging in a an alone space to know when to stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This analogy may not make a ton of sense to people, but I'm going to use it anyway. When I was my degrees in engineering, and when I was in college, I remember about the third day realizing I had no chance if I was going to be studying by myself, because I would just get stuck constantly. But then I quickly figured out that if I put myself into a group situation where we could use our own different strengths and weaknesses to kind of help us build towards solving whatever the problem was or the project, it was so much more fun. And obviously engineering doesn't sound like music or sports or writing or anything like that, but it was interesting how how much easier it was to just be connected with other people, and that idea of the whole being greater than the sum of the parts was really true even in like the act of solving like a fluids problem, right? And I think we forget that when it comes to our day to day, that sometimes it doesn't have to be you're on tour with a band. It could also just be like, I got to surround myself with some people so that we can build this kind of energy field that lifts us all up, you know?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
And it would be cool to know how to do that alone too. To get to back to
Right.
the question.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that would be, that would be the trick, right? Is like if you can figure out how to find that zone. One thing you were talking about the arrangement of an orchestra and how complicated this all is. One thing that gets talked about in within the concept of flow or being in the zone or deep work is that it always has to be something that's challenging
Right.
for it to feel satisfying. Now, one of the things I think that happens for me anyway is when I know something's challenging, sometimes I'm also really intimidated by it. Like I know deep down that I'm going to be able to do it if I build some steps to get there. Do you feel that sense of intimidation sometimes just by the sheer complexity of it at all?
Yeah, but I don't know that my experience in the flow state is only kind of gauging on whether something is challenging or not, because I'm thinking of like when I feel the most in tune with my own like musical sensibility and listening and building this thing in real time with other people, it's often much more simple, than something that I would do by myself.
Mm,
Again, because just stylistically, it's a different thing. But um, yeah, I definitely have an experience with simplicity where
hmm
I feel a lot more in the zone.
mm. In that, if you're able to remind yourself that it needs to be simple, or what?
I guess I'm referring to really specific like musical style,
Mm,
like because my own solo compositional style is so not simple.
mm,
um like it's just not, it's intense. and and what like for instance with Bell Orchestra or other improvised music, I find I get a lot less, let's say, wordy,
hmm
with my ideas. It's
hmm
I become a stripped down version of myself, and that version is quite fluid. It's quite in the zone. It's not neurotic, it's not criticizing, it's letting things breathe, it's taking lots of space and not overdoing anything, so yeah, I find that I strive to find those moments of like less.
hmm Yeah, that makes some sense. As you were talking about that, I think I was thinking about how it's when we're kids, right? We start to realize that we need to be challenged, right? Like your brain is even in an early age, I think, at least in my experience, you're starting to be like, this some of the stuff that we're doing is just like not going to stimulate me. So that's actually oftentimes where like the troublemakers come from, because they're just bored, right?
Yeah.
um and I wonder, and this is a little bit of a conceptual question, but how this desire, this need, you just said like, the way that I make music on my own is not particularly simple. How much of that need comes from a desire to push yourself or to challenge yourself that maybe you've had for a long time, or is this new, or has it been around forever?
I think that when I'm writing solo violin music, my concept of what kind of solo violin music I'm interested in making is just not like, because I'm not using like other instruments or looping or any sort of electronics. I mean, in this way, I have definitely written like that, and I'll write simple things. But in the thing that I'm speaking of, it's all coming from this one instrument in real time, live.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I always want to hear is this like waterfall of like pointillistic notes, melodies, and textures.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes some doing to achieve that on that
Mm-hmm.
instrument. So it's like a flutter of everything, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
just to have the dexterity to do that, and to then like, create interesting overarching melodies and harmonies and shapes and everything. It's just this, it's like weaving a really like painstakingly complex tapestry, as opposed to painting like one brushstroke and having it be genius.
Right.
It's like if I painted one brushstroke with a violin and there was nothing else going on, it would just be like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, that's a note. Very good. Okay,
Yeah.
moving along.
So I've often thought about musicians that there is a sweet spot of um, them staying interested enough in pushing themselves to get better and be more interesting without losing their audience, right? So sometimes I think some musicians can be like, I'm bored with I've mastered X, I'm going on to Y, but the audience is like, whoa, like I can't, my
Yeah,
brain can't even handle that. Like there's a lot of those like virtuoso guitarists that you learn about
sure.
from the
Yeah.
like 80s and 90s where you're like, this is like really interesting that you're able to do this, but it's hard to listen to. Have
Yeah.
you wondered if you will hit that point? Do you ever, is that a
I don't know if this is necessarily true, but I feel like I've come at it from the other end of the spectrum, which is like so I've made 3 solo albums, and the first one, like, they get more listenable as I go along, because I came at it from such a weird, like, conceptual, challenging kind of perspective. Like, my
mm-hmm,
first album is much more jarring, and I don't think it's not like that virtuosic music for only musicians thing, but stylistically it's like so niche. It's so,
mm-hmm,
I mean, it's so much less relatable. Like, then the third album I just made, it's still got the playing technique and everything, but it's much more like pretty and
mm-hmm,
listenable. And I think that I used to feel like I had more to prove. Like, I came out of the gates just like, I'm a super intense weirdo. Now I'm like,
yeah,
can we all just like relax a little bit, and
mm-hmm,
like,
yeah. I mean,
don't you guys just love it when things sound a little softer? Yeah, me too.
yeah, that's my maybe my favorite novelist is David Mitchell, and he
Right.
sometimes he kind of gets way off into the atmosphere, but other times when you are paying attention to the way he writes, it's so simple and declarative that it almost looks like a beginner doing it. But because he's so talented, he's able to make simplicity work so well. And I think that's, with any sort of, it's not just writing or music, it's even in the fucking emails we write, right? Like it's that
Or
ability
the
to,
food we eat,
yeah, like it's
the
like,
genius of
yeah,
less ingredients.
right, to go, like to have the capacity to do a lot, but then to be able to break it down or to present it in a way that's extremely simplistic. I mean, food's a great example, right? Like the best food I've ever had was in Italy. And it was in you, I was like, well, shit, if the best Italian food is gonna come to my plate, it's probably gonna be this like complicated lasagna or something, right? No, it was like mushrooms that were sauteed perfectly and like a piece of meat that was done exactly right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But they have the capacity to do all of the other stuff, and that's what allows them to do simple so very well.
Hmm.
Sarah, thank you for
Yes,
talking to me and to us.
you're very welcome.
I appreciate it, and I hope that people will check out. What is the name of your new solo album?
So my new solo album, pronounced in English, which is the language that I speak, is detritus. But for some weird reason, in my mind, it was detritus, and I think that's the weird accent of me knowing it as a French word,
Mm.
detritus. It's
Mm-hmm.
like,
Yeah.
oh, it's pronounced detritus. Okay, so I was mispronouncing classic me because I also pronounce my name both Neufeld and Neufeld, and like Bellercast often gets spelt like so many weird things. Like there's all this like funny Franglaisms in
Mm-hmm.
the world, but it's called Detritus and it's out in a few months. And
It's heartening to hear you say that you've mispronounced this the whole time, because I have pronounced that word detritus my whole life
you
also.
have?
Yep. But I also am, my brother makes fun of me constantly because there's a lot of words that I read. And so I see them very often and I think that I know them, but it turns out I don't.
Well,
Like
it sounds better when you say it detritus, anyways.
I think so too. Detritus sounds like a metal album.
I know. I feel like I wouldn't have called it that if I had really made friends with that pronunciation.
Right. Detritus by the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. um,
Totally.
yeah. I
It's a
also
singing
do.
album.
This is my brothers hate that I say cornucopia, but apparently it's cornucopia.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, apparently I say that word a lot and I mispronounce it
I don't
constantly.
think I've ever said that word, but I would definitely pronounce it cornucopia.
Yeah, well, you're 1 out of 2, and I'm 0 for 2 on these words of approximately 10 letters length. Um,
Cornucopia.
where can people, if they want to pay attention to you in a social media of our times ways, what's the best place for them to do that?
I'm horrible at social media, but I do have an Instagram. It's at Sarah K. Neufeld.
Mm-hmm.
And my website is Sarah Neufeld Music. And yeah, Google.
Yeah, just Google. That's true. I mean, at this point, just like Google her name and you'll find her. All right, Sarah.
There's some nice videos coming out though. That's everybody's focus now that we have no live shows right now. Is like
Mhm.
videos.
We got to make these the best that we've ever made.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Well, I'm excited to listen, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.